this week's update, I'll be looking at what sanctions on Russia would mean for the energy markets here in Europe.
Lawmakers in NATO countries have spent the last few weeks working out how to react to the build-up of Russian troops near Ukraine's borders. A concerted military response from NATO members appears unlikely, but the option of sanctioning the Russian energy industry remains on the table. With around 15% of Russia's GDP coming from oil and gas, the sector is an obvious target for anybody seeking to put pressure on the Russian government.
The trouble is that Europe, unlike the US, is heavily dependent on imported Russian crude and refined products.
Russia supplies up to 1.5 million barrels a day of its Urals crude from Baltic ports, up to 400,000 barrels a day from the Black Sea, and up to 800,000 barrels a day through the Druzhba pipeline to Central and Eastern Europe. For refiners in Northwest Europe and the Mediterranean, Urals tends to be part of a wider crude intake, while for those on the Druzhba system it still accounts for the majority of supplies, despite efforts in recent years to diversify. European refiners would be forced to increase their use of North Sea and US crudes in the event of a full ban on Russian imports, but even that wouldn't be enough to account for the shortfall.
The resulting rise in European fuel prices would be greatly exacerbated if any import ban was also extended to cover refined products.
Russian supplies account for 50 to 60% of Europe's 4 to 6 million tonnes per month of seaborne imports of diesel and other middle distillates. The next two largest suppliers are Saudi Arabia and India, accounting for 10 to 20% and 5 to 15% of imports respectively. In a worst-case scenario in which a total embargo on Russian exports is imposed, Europe would need to treble its imports from those two countries to make up the deficit.
European refiners could try to compensate for the loss of Russian product supply by increasing their own refinery runs.
If they had to replace the lost diesel supply from Russia themselves, European refineries would have to raise runs by around 10 percentage points, taking them to almost 90% of total capacity, which would be the highest utilisation rate this century. With most European economies struggling to get back on their feet after the COVID-19 pandemic, and there being little appetite for a renaissance in domestic fossil fuel refining, it's difficult to imagine European governments cutting themselves off from imported Russian energy anytime soon.
That's all for this edition of the European Products Update, so until next time, let me wish you all the very best from everybody here at Argus.